For more now on Chinese tech firms, let's bring in Ying-ying Lu, the co-host of TechBuzz China Podcast by Pandaily. Thanks so much for joining us. What can you tell us about the performance of Chinese tech companies in the US markets this year?
Well, this is something that Pandaily's actually written a lot about. First off, thank you for having me, Anand. Thank you for videoing me in from New Orleans, and Merry Christmas. It's Christmas Eve here. Definitely 2018 has, by the numbers, been the largest year for Chinese tech companies IPOing in the US, as you guys just mentioned in the clip. We've seen over 40 companies actually go public with a total offering of well over 15 billion US dollars. Now that, as you mentioned in your clip, is for sure doubling year on year. However, there's actually increasing competition from Hong Kong and companies that are rushing to go public actually in APAC. And APAC region is seen as a contender, and it's pulling away some of these larger public offerings. So I'm optimistic about the continued IPO and offering of these companies, but definitely seeing competition from other regions. You know,
you mentioned the competition coming from Hong Kong. It seems that what is happening here is almost counterintuitive, given that there's the trade dispute within the United States right now. I mean, how does one explain Chinese companies wanting to list here rather than Hong Kong?
Well, without going into politics, we really try to stay away from that. We're very tech-focused media. But, you know, I feel like Chinese companies are kind of incubated within the wall of the Chinese internet, and they've received a lot of favorable policies and been protected against competition by companies outside of China. However, in choosing to actually list outside of their domestic market, they're taking advantage of what some people still view as a more fair, a more reasonable investor pool market, and quite sort of objective policies, if you will. So companies that are pretty solid in their own value do still seek that advantage and that fairness abroad.
Let's look at a company like Huawei, a company that's been in the news a lot recently. What are its prospects?
So for sure, the news this year has focused all, I mean, from a US perspective, Huawei is definitely in violation. And I think, you know, again, without going too deeply into the political aspect, I do think that, you know, the US government's going to continue to draw pretty strict lines around not just Huawei, but potentially other Chinese companies that, you know, we haven't heard about as much up to this point. However, objectively, from a technological standpoint, Huawei still has, for example, the strongest 5G internationally. I see it as a company that has strong technology that's actually being withheld and restricted for political reasons. And, you know, talking about Huawei, we can also hear that in an entire episode in our podcast this year, that stirred up a lot of sentiment amongst domestic Chinese tech watchers, as well as just average Chinese tech citizens, in terms of sentiments about Chinese tech companies, maybe not actually having the technology that people think that they do, and really just being opened up to, like, we've opened the box of looking inside these companies and seeing what they're actually capable of producing, and it's sort of aroused a lot of insecurity at the same time.
Yeah, I think there has been no finding yet on Huawei, but you were just talking about the podcast that you did on ZTE. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Pitching the podcast, I guess, we are TechBuzz China by Pandaily, and we really kind of, for our episodes, look into Chinese media and what people are writing in Chinese about similar topics that are covered often in American media. So in particular, specific to ZTE, broadly, what we saw is that, you know, the US thinks this is very political. It's definitely, you know, has a more US-centric view of like what was actually going on with ZTE, but I think the Chinese sentiment, and if you read beneath the objective titles, was a lot of insecurity, a lot of like, we're being found out, we need to invest actually more in our tech sector in order to build the core technology that enables the sector to stay strong.
Ying-ying Lu, co-host of TechBuzz, thanks so much for joining us.